thank you so much for being with us. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you for inviting me.
So after months of working on this garden, and we finally have finished everything in the front, one of the last, I would say, like crowning touches or the exclamation point to the garden is looking at this patio, which overlooks everything. So this is the vantage point where most people will enjoy this garden, this front porch. And I think one thing that's overlooked oftentimes is the furniture and the way that we outfit those spaces. Oftentimes it's an afterthought. But we think about all the effort that went into the design and the procurement of the plants and the hundreds of hours of labor that go into making a beautiful garden. And there's a story there. Every great garden has a story. I feel like so should the furniture.
You can pop in some metal furniture, some plastic furniture as an afterthought, but you sit in metal furniture on a hot day and it's not comfortable. It's hot. The wood's always cool, and we've always had an affinity towards wood all through history. So anyone can relate to wood. It's a natural. It fits in naturally with the garden.
So when I started learning about your company, Forever Redwood, what really impressed me is that what you're doing on a much larger scale is a beautiful type of gardening or agriculture. You're growing all of these redwood trees. You're maintaining hundreds of acres of forest, and from there you're making beautiful pergolas, furniture. It's a very sustainable business model, and every piece of furniture has a story. It has a provenance. It was grown there. It was handmade. I think that's amazing.
When I started the company in the 90s, I made the decision that I was going to let our customers get whatever they wanted. And like the chair you're sitting in was designed, the lady gave me a design. And we improved on it because we always make it a thick timber motif, right? Same thing with that one. That was designed by an Italian lady whose husband had passed away. And she named it the Ti Amo bench. And so we've always been willing to build whatever the customers want. We're not great designers, our customers are. But the big picture is I'm not in the furniture business. I do this as a value-added product line to pay for forest restoration work, which we're in desperate need of. So all this goes towards buying forest land. Right now we're trying to buy a 40-acre piece, just a little bit, because we're a small operation. But the forests in the West are burning. It's a horrendous situation. Some of it is due to global warming. Most of it is due to poor forestry practices.
Sure.
And we need to change that, and there isn't the political will for it.
Raul, how many acres do you have in management or cultivation right now?
Between lands that I own, lands that the company owns, land that friends that are completely aligned with us, we have about 500 acres that we've been managing. But that's compared to the millions and millions of acres that are burning right now. We're a guppy in a big sea. But our company's growing. We grew over 50% this year.
So talk me through the process of the forestry agriculture that you're engaged in.
When we first started in the 90s, the lands that we manage were heavily logged in the early 60s. And they took out most of the redwood and most of the Douglas fir conifers because that's where the money trees were. And they left the low-quality trees, the tan oak and the madrone and some of the sugar pine. So when we got in there, we had this overgrown forest of small trees packed together, just a kindling pile ready to burn. Instead of having 100 trees per acre that were of all different sizes, as a mature forest would be, you had 500, 700 trees per acre. Most of them are going to die because they're suppressed. Right. So we went in and you go through and you do a thinning, a manual thinning. You take out 60, 70% of the trees. But you take out the garbage. You take out the ones that are suppressed, the ones that aren't going to make it, the ones that are already dead. You limb up the branches, so you lower the fire hazard. You also take a few trees to pay for it, But basically, when we started, we had 7,000 board feet to the acre of standing timber in 1994. The same land has 16,000 today, and we've harvested it twice. The key is to harvest lightly.
Right.
Take care of it like you care for it.
Indeed. Well, and it is on a grand scale what we do as gardeners. The objectives may be different in certain ways, but it's not terribly different than the way that we look at even a small space like this, where we figure out, like, what are the noble plants that we want to thrive, and how do we make sure that everything's got enough space, everything has the resources that it needs.
The forest grows naturally. In a 10-year cycle, it's going to add about 35% volume. In a 15-year cycle, which is how we cut, it adds 50, 60% depending on how old the stand is. We cut 20% of the stand every 15 years, and we skew the cut towards the lower quality trees. We take a couple of good trees, but mostly we take lower quality trees. So the stand's improving. Overall, you're getting better trees, you're getting more volume, and you lower the fire hazard. And you focus on all the stuff that you cut down. You leave all the branches, you leave all the tops, you leave anything that's not worth, you leave it on the forest floor.
Gotcha.
Same reason you do gardening when you leave the mulch. It's the same
That's
thing.
right.
You're building up the soil. You're adding moisture, you're adding habitat, because if you leave a 15 or 18-inch log, that's perfect habitat for rabbits and for small mammals.
Yeah, I'm mystified when I see people, especially if you have a larger lot, who are removing every single downed leaf from their trees, raking it clean, and it's like, well, so those leaves that's the fertility for the next generation. It's the fertility for the next season. The tree has a way of recycling itself.
Old-time gardeners used to put fencing around a tree,
Right.
and they throw all the leaves in there.
Right.
I mean, do they still do that? I mean, I remember as a kid.
You don't see it much.
So, yeah, exactly. You want to leave that material. You don't want a perfectly clean forest because the soil dries up. It's got to have a lot of structure.
Right. It's a continuous loop of agriculture. It's whatever's pulled up from the soil is going to end up in the leaves, and then the leaves fall down and are composted back into the soil.
You asked about planting. We don't do a lot of planting anymore. We still do a little bit, but we used to do a lot. And what we learned is the redwood resprouts, the Douglas fir seeds aggressively. So what you need to do is leave the soil in the best shape you can, and it'll take care of itself. Gardening on a big scale. It is gardening.
Right.
It really is gardening.
No, it absolutely is. And it's that story, Raul, like just understanding what you do that makes this furniture just that much more special. This is also born of your heart and your passion. It's part of 30 plus years of investing yourself in good forestry, good management, and then figure out, how do we make something beautiful that also has that deep connection to the land and to the garden. And that's what I think makes these pieces so incredibly special.
Thank you. Well, a lot of people, especially recently, say that they're buying the furniture to support the forestry work.
Sure.
When we started 25 years ago, people were like, what's restoration forestry? What's sustainable forestry? They didn't even know what it was.
Right.
Everybody knows what it is now. But the problem is so big. You see, the Indians, up until about 150 years ago, when they basically got kicked off their lands, they burned regularly, all through the West, from Colorado to Washington, all through California. But then we started suppressing fire, and the small trees started to grow.
Right.
And then you started having some horrendous fires starting in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And it's been a downhill battle ever since, because we do the opposite. We encourage small trees. We cut the big trees as much as we can because they're the money trees.
Right.
And you need a forest of trees of all ages. You need them spaced apart, and you got to keep the fuel load down. But it's not about raking the forest floor. It's about getting it down on the ground where it's full of moisture and it won't
That's
catch
right.
fire. You see, if you get everything down about a foot above the ground, it won't light up. If it's up here, it just stays dry, and it's just a kindling pile.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, and we see evidence, this year especially.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And you can't turn it all into parks. It's privately owned land. It's a mix of private, public, state, local. But the good for everybody who knows is in the industry. The foresters know what good forestry is.
Right.
But it costs money to do it. And unless it's legislated, it's like, hey, you can't harvest timber unless you lower the fire hazard also. It won't get done.
Right. Well, here's to hoping and wishing for a brighter future. And Raul, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed just listening to your passion and seeing the result of your work. I have to believe that these wouldn't be possible without all the effort and heart that you're putting into everything you do on your acreage every year. And it's definitely represented in the finished product. It's beautiful.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, the furniture is going to age with the garden. This stuff should be here for 20 years, no problem.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll still be here in 20 years.
Here's open.
Thank you.